Hello, all. I hope you're doing well. Um, I know that we already discussed Rene Descartes on campus. I mean, the first part of his own philosophy. However, I decided that in my presentation here, I'm going to refer to everything related to Rene Descartes, even what we referred to during our session. So, these are the main points that I'd like to discuss in this presentation. I am going to refer to Descartes' aim, method, criterion of knowledge, which is something that I already discussed with you when I met you, how he proved the existence of God, and how he proved the existence of the external world. So these 3 points are already covered. So when I refer to them now, I'm just going to recap. I'm not going to go into much detail because I've already explained them, right? But I'm going just to recap them. However, the 3 points that I haven't covered when I met you, the relationship between the mind and the body, which is, as I remember, I wrote it on the board, Cartesian dualism, and the psychology of the emotions, or how Rene Descartes identifies the soul, and the theory of innate ideas, right? So let's start. This is a very short introduction on his life. He was born in 1596 in central France. He was the son of a minor nobleman, and he belonged to a family that had produced a number of learned men. At the age of 8, he was enrolled in the Jesuit school of La Flèche in Anjou, where he spent the rest of his school days. Besides the usual classical studies, Descartes received instruction in mathematics and scholasticism, and I remember I highlighted this point, and his interest and focus on mathematics had a great connection between his own philosophy and the main aims behind his own philosophy and the methods that he used in his own philosophy, which attempted to use human reason to understand Christian doctrine. Descartes' literary work is quite extensive. His writings, as I said, are not restricted to philosophical works, but also comprise basic books in the fields of mathematics, in biology, and in physics, and an extensive correspondence. His principal works on philosophy are Discourse on a Method, published in 1637, Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641, Principles of Philosophy, 1644, and finally Rules for the Directions of the Mind in 1701. The first point, which is his method, as I said, we discussed this before, but I'm going to go over this very quickly. We said that the fundamental aim of Descartes was to attain philosophical truth by reason. Reason is a key word with reference to his philosophy. So, philosophy must rest, according to Descartes, on pure reason and not on tradition. Again, when we refer to tradition, we refer to scholasticism, we refer to the ancients, and specifically, we refer to the importance of the writings of Aristotle on how people used to think at that time. He wanted to develop a whole system of philosophy based on true propositions, which were part of an organic whole, so that nothing was presupposed, but each would be self-evident and certain. He wanted to arrive to certainty. For Descartes, knowledge begins with some self-evident innate ideas or principles and deduce other truth from them. Hence, he wanted to give philosophy a new start, desiring to reject any authority. His aim was to bring into philosophy the kind of clarity and certainty which is found in mathematics. As I said, his great interest in mathematics made him feel that his methodology with reference to his own philosophy would be more or less entangled or connected with his own interest in math. Therefore, he wanted to use the method of mathematics in philosophy. The method of mathematics consists in the use of only two mental operations by which true knowledge can be achieved: intuition and deduction. And please know the definition of these two words. We already, when we dealt with the philosophy of Francis Bacon, gave a very clear definition of what deduction is, what deductive reasoning is, and we made a comparison between deduction and induction, right? So it would be very beneficial if you actually use your previous definition of deduction in that case as well. But what is intuition? By intuition, he means our understanding of self-evident principles, such as the axioms of geometry: a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, or things equal to the same thing are equal to each other, and these are evident. No rational mind can doubt them. If you remember, on the board I wrote, I drew actually these 2 points, and I drew the straight line, or even the triangle. I told you I'm horrible at math, but I was trying just to show you what he really means by intuition and why he decided that mathematics is going to be a good means of, supporting his own philosophy. By deduction, he means orderly logical reasoning or inference from self-evident proposition. If you remember, by deductive reasoning, we said that we do have certain premises, and based on these premises, we arrive at a specific conclusion, and this conclusion is supposedly certain, right? In opposition to inductive reasoning, which actually starts with probability. According to Descartes, the chief secret of method is to arrange all facts into a deductive logical system. Descartes' goal is to build a system of philosophy based on both intuition and deduction, which will remain as certain and as imperishable as geometry. Now, in order to obtain this kind of mathematical certainty in philosophy, he introduces his methodic doubt. He's going to doubt everything. He actually says that it is essential to doubt everything and to regard as provisionally false anything of which there can be the slightest doubt. In this sense, it is universal doubt. It is again called methodic doubt, and it's not the doubt of the skeptics, because as I explained to you, he uses this doubt only as a method in order to attain a certain knowledge, but the skeptics doubted because they said it is impossible to attain certainty. So we're dealing here with two completely different means and meanings of doubt. He doubted the testimony of the senses. This is the first thing he doubted, and I think also Francis Bacon doubted the senses. He said that the senses could actually delude us. Um, Again, he says that the senses could make mistakes. He says, "What has deceived me once may deceive me again." He also doubted the opinion of others. He doubted the reality of his own body. He doubted the external world. He even doubted mathematical beliefs, which he regarded as model of certainty, right? So he actually decided to doubt everything. But his doubt, his methodic doubt, was more or less the first stage into attaining the certain truth or the certain knowledge that he attains to reach. However, while carrying out his assigned task of subjecting all our knowledge methodically to doubt, Descartes was struck by one truth of which there could be no doubt whatever. And from the fact that a person is thinking or doubting, he knows at least that he exists because he's carrying out these activities. So there is actually a doubter, there is a thinker, right? It is this person or this kind of entity that does the action of doubting or the action of thinking, right? So from the fact that the person is thinking or even doubting, he knows at least that he exists because he is carrying out these activities. And this is the fundamental truth of the whole of Descartes' philosophy. I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. Right? Now, by intuition, he knows that he could not think if he did not exist. So if he did not exist, he wouldn't be doing this action of thinking or doubting. Descartes, however, still doubts the existence of his body, right? So he actually figured out that there's a thinker, but it's not really his body. It is something, some kind of self, some kind of an immaterial thinking self or thinking substance, right? Which is what he refers to as res cogitans. This is the only thing that he believes exists, right? It is this self, it is this immaterial self that exists, but not actually his own body. He still did not prove the existence of his own body. He's going to do this later. It is certain that I doubt or think, right? So doubt implies a doubter, thinking implies a thinker, a thinking thing, which is res cogitans, or spiritual substance. Thus, he reaches what seems to him a rational, self-evident proposition. To doubt means to think means to be to ergo cogito, to be to ergo sum. So I think, therefore I am. Now, this is the first and most certain knowledge that occurs to one who philosophizes in an orderly manner, right? And this is the principle we have been seeking, a certain self-evident starting point. So this is actually his own starting point. In this process of doubting, we finally reach a solid foundation, for while we're doubting, we are using the thinking process. In fact, our doubts imply the reality of our thoughts. Descartes' cogito ergo sum in many ways the most famous principle in modern philosophy. He regarded it as a primary truth of all human reason. Descartes' first axiom has significant implications. I think, therefore I am means that the existence of reason is more important than anything else. Man's reality lies in his thinking process. Descartes reminded that the student of philosophy and science shouldn't really base his conclusions upon the work of the ancients, even knowing all of Aristotle will not make philosophers out of us. According to Descartes, instead of accepting the traditional views, we must study the great book of the world. We should never become philosophers, even though we should read all the reasoning of Plato and Aristotle if we cannot form a sound judgment upon any proposition. Now, after he arrived to a starting point in his own philosophy, which is the existence of an immaterial self of some sort that thinks, he decided that he needs to prove the existence of God, and he believes here that some of our ideas are innate. Innate means that we're actually born with it. We already know it, right? We don't really need deduction to figure it out. It is actually there. And some of our own inventions, most of them seem to have been received from without. Now, certain ideas we regard as effects or copies of an external world, but all of this may be an illusion, right? Whatever you see, whatever you conjecture, all of this could be an illusion. But one of the ideas that he wants to refer to here, that he believes is an innate idea that we're all born with, is the idea of God. He believes that nothing can come from nothing. Whatever exists must have a cause for existing. This too is a self-evident proposition. The principle of Descartes' argument is actually the long-established principle of medieval philosophy, is that ex nihilo nihil fit, or out of nothing can come nothing. Moreover, the cause must be at least as great as the effect. There must be at least as much reality in it. That which contains greater reality in itself, and which is the more perfect, cannot be a consequence of and dependent on the less perfect. Right? I think I explained this in class as well. Right? So God is the one who created us, and therefore God Himself is the cause, and therefore we are, the consequences, or we are actually dependent on that cause. Therefore, we are less perfect than God, right? So I myself cannot be the cause of the idea of God, for I am a finite, imperfect being, while the idea of God is the idea of a perfect, infinite being. It must have been placed in me by an infinite being or God, and hence God must exist, right? This is something that we are born with. We are less perfect. We are finite creatures, and therefore we should have been created by an infinite being, a more supreme being, and therefore, God is that supreme being, that perfect being, so God actually exists. He believes that he couldn't have been the cause of his own existence, because I have an idea of perfection. Because if I had created myself, I should have made myself perfect. And moreover, I should be able to preserve myself, which is not the case, right? If I created myself as a human being, then why did I create diseases? Why am I mortal, right? Why am I mortal? Because if I created myself, then I should have created myself in the most perfect, sense, more or less, which is actually is not the case here. So it follows from the very notion of God as a perfect being that he actually exists. It is not in my power to conceive a God without existence, that is, a being supremely perfect and yet devoid of an absolute perfection. God must be self-caused, for if he is the effect of another being, then that being is the effect of another, and so on ad infinitum. So God created us, we create our children create their children, so on and so forth. It just, it's a circle that never ends. So we have an infinite regress and never can reach a causal explanation of the effect with which we begin. The idea of God I have received from God. It is innate. I already know it. God is not only the cause, but the archetype of our existence. He has created man in his own image. We need not wonder that God, in creating us, should have placed this idea in us to serve as the mark of the workman imprinted on his work. So if God did not exist, we couldn't possibly be what we are, nor could we have an idea of God. We know more of God himself and of the human mind that we know of corporeal objects. Now, after I prove the existence of God, it would be easier on the part of Descartes to prove the existence of the external world, including his body itself, right? Because he started with establishing this kind of axiom, I think therefore I am. And as I said, the I here is a representative of an immaterial, some kind of self, right? And he couldn't prove the existence of his own body unless first of all he would prove the existence of the being that caused the existence of everything else. So the other problem that we need to think about is the external world. So we imagine that there are bodies outside us, but how can we know that they actually exist, right? So we have feelings of pleasure, of pain, of appetite, sensations, which we refer instinctively to bodily causes. But we already agreed that the first thing he asked us to just believe that these things could deceive us, and therefore he asked us to doubt that. He started with our senses, that our senses could really deceive us. So since our sensations often deceive us, and since our desires and appetites are often misleading, then we cannot prove the existence of bodies from the existence of such experiences. You cannot say that my body exists because I feel hungry, or because I feel thirsty, or because I'm in pain, right? He said that all of this is a result of the sensations of your own senses. And since your senses can deceive you, right, because we need to doubt our own senses, then we cannot prove the existence of external bodies through these experiences. The existence in my mind of illusions of sense and even hallucinations and dreams is comparable with the divine goodness, since God has endowed me with the power of intellect to dispel and correct such delusions. He said God is the one who has given us that power to imagine, that power to dream. And since God is the one who has given us this power, God is not a deceiver, as we agreed before, but it's a truthful being. Then our sensations, therefore, are caused by real bodies. What are bodies? Well, bodies exist independently of our thinking. They do not need our existence in order to exist. Again, I think we talked about this dilemma when I met you, right? It's the body and the mind. And according to Rene Descartes, that each of these entities can exist independently. According to him, he believes that we don't really need our bodies for our minds, more or less, the thinking immaterial I, to exist or to perform, you know, um, whatever it needs to doubt or think about. Now, according to Descartes, in reality, there's only one such being who is God, right? Who is substance in the absolute sense. Descartes also affirms two relative substances, mind and body, which exist independently of one another, but both depend on God. The substance cannot change its attributes, but it can change its modes. So the body will always be extended, but its figure need not remain same. So God as the first cause of motion in the world, he is the mover. Descartes holds that God has given the world a certain amount of motion, right? So for him, motion is constant. And since God is immutable, God does not change. All changes in the world of bodies must follow constant rules or laws of nature. All laws of nature are laws of motion. All differences in bodies are explained by different relations of the parts. So solid bodies are bodies in which the parts are united, and at rest fluids are bodies in which the parts move, and so on and so forth. Now, Descartes maintains that we do indeed have both minds and bodies, and that the two are not ultimately one and the same thing, but they are radically and irreducibly different sorts of thing which exist in an intimate union. So even though they actually exist independently, as he explained before, he actually believes that they can exist in an intimate union. He believes that attribute of the body is extension and the attribute of the mind is thinking. He believes that body is passive but mind is active and free. And I think we also discussed that when I met you on campus. These two substances are absolutely distinct, okay? So the mind or the soul is rascagations. As far as I am a thinking, an unextended thing, I have clear and distinct idea of myself. Therefore, that is my mind. So when he says there, I think therefore I am, he's really referring to his mind here and not his body, through which I am what I am, is entirely and truly separate from my body and may exist without it. I can conceive myself as entire without the faculties of imagination and perception, but I cannot conceive these without an intelligent substance in which they reside. So, more or less, it is this body that is regarded, more or less like a container to contain this mind, okay, to contain this mind. So you will not see yourself as a complete human being if this mind is not connected or united to a specific vessel, which is actually the body, for that mind to start, imagining and perceiving things. Imagination and perception are distinct from myself. They are like modes are to things. Descartes includes will and also such higher emotions as are not the result of the union of mind and body in thought. For him, thinking and perceiving things and feelings and emotions are completely, independent of each other. According to him, a thinking thing is one that doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, imagines, as well as feels. He believes that thought embraces everything, which we now label as consciousness. To be conscious is to be aware, more or less. So consciousness is al-wa'i and is not restricted to the intellectual and the cognitive abilities of the mind. So consciousness, which is this big umbrella, includes thought and includes feelings as well. Neither extension nor figure nor notion pertains to the thinking thing. Now, the extension and the figure and the notion, all of this is related to the body and not related to the mind. Okay? That is why he says, my knowledge about my mind precedes that of any corporal thing. So I am aware or I am conscious that I have a specific mind that I think with before I am aware of the existence of my body. I may not doubt whether there is anybody in existence while I already perceive that I think. According to Descartes, mind and body compose a substantial unity. All the sensations just mentioned are merely confused modes of consciousness, the result of this union. So the result of this union brings about all of these examples of consciousness that we have just described, right? According to him, man is not a pure spirit. And then he started talking about animals. And he said that motion in animals, and often in ourselves, occurs without the intervention of reason, right? When you decide to move or to walk or to run, you don't do this, you don't really think about it. It just happens. He says the senses excited by external objects simply react to the animal spirits, and the reactions are mechanical, right? That is why he says the animal is nothing but a machine, right? According to him, animals don't really have any feelings, okay? So the reactions that our body does is more or less done in a mechanical way. In man, bodily motion may produce sensations. So if I were merely a thinking being, if my soul were not somehow intimately conjoined with my body, I should, for example, know that I am hungry, but not feel hungry. I shouldn't have sensations and feelings, which are confused modes of consciousness resulting from the intimate union of body and mind. I hope you're getting this because I know it's a bit complicated. Now, all he's saying is that there are sometimes confused modes of consciousness, according to him, which result from this unity between the mind and the body. And he said that if the body did not exist, then I wouldn't have feelings, right? So you would know that you're hungry, but you wouldn't feel that feeling of hunger, right? That is why he said that these feelings are confused modes of consciousness resulting from the intimate union of body and mind. Just how this intimate union is to be conceived is not really made clear by Descartes, and it is not possible within the framework of his dualism. Dualism means two: mind and body. Descartes warns against confounding mind and body with one another. Thought and extension are combined in man in unity of composition, but not in unity of nature. The union should not be compared with a mixture of two bodies. It's just trying to tell us here that there is definitely a difference between mind and body, and it is because of this, how the mind and the body are conjoined together that we start having, these confused modes of consciousness or, feelings of some sort. Descartes suggested that the body works like a machine, that it has the material properties of extension and motion, and that it follows the laws of physics. Okay, so this is on the one hand, that the body works like a machine, it has material properties of extension and motion, and it follows the laws of physics. Okay, what about the mind or the soul? It was described in a non-material entity that lacks extension and motion and does not follow the laws of physics. So actually we're dealing here with a complete difference, a complete contrast between two different concepts. Descartes argued that only humans have minds and that the mind interacts with the body at the pineal gland. This form of dualism or duality proposes that the mind controls the body, but that the body can also influence the otherwise rational mind, such as when people act out of passion. Most of the previous accounts of the relationship between mind and body had been unidirectional. So it's a direction from one side only. So if the mind controls the body, if the mind knows that you're hungry, and then it gives some kind of signal to the body, then the body is going to feel that hunger, right? So it's the mind controlling the body. But then he said that sometimes also it's the other way around. So if you feel, it's this kind of feeling, um you're so much passionate, for instance, about something, passionate about reading, or actually you love someone, then this definitely is going to have an effect on your mind. So sometimes, the relationship is reciprocal. Cartesian dualism, which is what I mean by mind, the relationship between mind and body, set the agenda for philosophical discussion of the mind body problem for many years after Descartes' death. The question of how a non material mind could influence a material body without invoking supernatural explanations remains controversial to this day. Let's talk about the psychology of emotions, or the soul. According to Descartes, the soul doesn't consist of separate souls or faculties, but it is a single principle expressing itself in various ways. The same soul that feels also reasons and wills. He distinguishes between the active and the passive phases of the soul, the actions and passions of the soul, as he calls them. The former, which is the actions of the soul, are our volitions, what we want to do, or acts of will, which depend on soul itself. So I am free to will to love God, to affirm or deny propositions, to revive memories, to create pictures in the imagination, or to move my body. Okay, all of these are volitions. This is what you really want to do. The latter, which is the passions of the soul, the passions, include sensations and their copies, appetites, pain, heat, other bodily feelings, which are referred either to external objects or to the body. The voluntary or active states are absolutely in the power of the soul only indirectly, except in those cases in which the soul is itself their cause. There are, however, other states or perceptions of which we feel the effects, as in the soul itself. These are sentiments of joy, anger, and the like, which are passions in the restricted sense of the term. They are perceptions or sentiments or emotions of the soul, which we refer particularly to it, and which are cause supported in strength by certain movements of the animal spirits. The principal effect and use of such passions, however, is to incite and dispose the soul to will the things for which they prepare the body. So fear, for instance, incites the will to flee. Courage incites the will to fight, and so on. So the passions have as their immediate cause the movements of the animal spirits, which agitate the pineal gland, but they can sometimes be caused by the action of the soul, which wills to conceive such and such an object. Thus I may arouse feelings of courage in myself by analyzing the situation. So simply the soul gives you the specific passion so that you would act according to that passion. Okay, so the soul has given you the feeling of courage, so the first thing you decide to do is to fight. Or the soul incites in you the feeling of um you're so frightened, for instance, you're so scared, so this is going to incite the feeling of running away, or actually fleeing that specific situation. The last idea I'd like to refer to with reference to Rene Descartes' philosophy is the theory of innate ideas. Now, Descartes distinguishes three kinds of ideas, namely those that are fabricated, adventitious, or innate. Fabricated, we know the meaning of fabricated. They are not true. They are fake, right? They are mere inventions of the mind. Accordingly, the mind can control them so they can be examined and set aside at will, and their internal content can be changed. These are, ideas that are not real, that you actually make up. And I think we all have our fabricated ideas, in our heads. The second type of ideas is called the adventitious ideas. And these are sensations produced by some material thing existing externally to the mind. But unlike fabrications, adventitious ideas cannot be examined and set aside at will, nor can their internal content be manipulated by the mind. For example, no matter how hard one tries, if someone is standing next to a fire, he cannot help but feel the heat is heat. He cannot set aside the sensory idea of heat by merely willing it, as we can do with our idea of Santa Claus, for example. He also cannot change its internal content so as to feel something other than heat, say cold, because these are feelings that are produced or intrigued by something that exists outside the mind. So this fire does really exist and it is not really fabricated by my mind, so you cannot really change it. And you cannot really change the sensation of that idea itself. Finally, innate ideas. We already discussed them. And these are ideas placed in the mind by God at creation. These are ideas that you already know, right? That God has already placed them in your own minds. These ideas can be examined and set aside at will, but their internal content cannot be manipulated. You can just forget about them for some time, but whatever that is there inside you, inside your head, this cannot really be changed. Geometrical ideas are paradigm examples of innate ideas. For example, the idea of a triangle can be examined and set aside at will, but its internal content cannot be manipulated so as to cease being the idea of a three-sided figure. So we know it's a three-sided figure, but we're not really going to think about it all the time because we don't really care about a triangle. But, it is actually there in your head. Other examples of innate ideas would be metaphysical principles, like, for instance, what is done cannot be undone, the idea of the mind, and also the idea of God. When he proved the existence of God, we said that it was an innate idea. He did not really need reason and deduction in order to prove the existence of God. The aim of Descartes is to reach clear and certain knowledge, such as arises when we judge that it is impossible for a thing to be otherwise than we actually conceive it. Certain knowledge cannot spring from the senses, for the senses, as we said before, do not reveal what things are in themselves, but only how they affect us. Colors, sounds, tastes, odors do not belong to the object. What the real object is, what it is when stripped of the qualities the senses ascribe to it, we can only know by clear and distinct thinking. If we cannot derive true knowledge from sense experience, if genuine knowledge is the result of reasoning from certain basic concepts and principles, there must be inherent in the mind itself, right? Another word that we use for innate ideas is a priori, because it is actually there inside our. The mind has its own standards or norms which guide it in the pursuit of truth. Principles of knowledge can become explicit only in the course of experience, as the mind exercises itself in thought, but they are somehow present from the beginning. Descartes' basic idea is that reason has its own natural norms. How they are present, he's not really sure. Let's sum up what we just said. In his search for indubitable truth, Descartes lays greater emphasis on discovering a method than on a theory of knowledge. Descartes was interested in discovering a method of truth rather than in a detailed discussion of epistemological problems. For this, he has recourse to mathematics and a priori ideas or innate ideas. Descartes was almost a dogmatist in his belief that the reason was competent to attain certain knowledge. Though he adopted and studied skepticism, he was a realist enough to accept the existence of an external world whose true nature could be discovered only by rational thinking. Like Parmenides, Descartes placed reason before experience and even opted for reason against experience, as is clearly the case with his anthropological dualism. I hope this is a bit clear. I know that there are some complicated ideas within, right? But I think it's only related to his own duality or his dualism, the Cartesian dualism, right? The mind and the body. But this is because he himself, you know, did not really reach a clear identification between these two terms, right? I'm going to send you a PDF for what I actually said here, right? And please study Descartes very well. Thank you very much.